Hello, folks. This is Ben Yessel. How's it going? Just gonna take another night walk here on a Tuesday evening. Try to explain just a few thoughts I've had today, more of these this evening in particular, about a certain subject that maybe I haven't talked about for a while, but it was recommended to me that I see a documentary / movie. I think there's a book this is based on. It's called Guns, Germs, and Steel. That's Guns, Germs, and Steel. So, as the title of this whole thing in National Geographic probably somewhat explains, this, I know I've only seen the first part of this. Is a 3-part thing on YouTube, so you guys can look this up on YouTube and watch this as well. It's right there on YouTube. It's in 3 parts. National Geographic. Well, as you could probably guess, this has something to do with why is it that some countries, some people, some areas of the world are wealthier and more developed than others? Why is there inequality in the world that way? And all the other kinds of questions that somehow relate to this, more or less. Again, I've only seen the first part of this 3-part series, and at the outset, there's a young man from Papua New Guinea who asks a professor. He's a bit younger at this point when he asks him this, but he's a professor of something in the sciences. He's not a historian. He's more botany, or actually birds, that kind of thing. He's kind of into the life sciences, that sort of thing. But he asked this professor, why is it that you white people have so much cargo being stuff, right? And at first it's a very easy thing to explain, maybe, but and he quickly realized, without saying too much, without saying anything, I think, or just he wanted to say something, I think, but he did just cut himself off. He didn't really explain what he said to him. It was just, there was a part to his question that has stuck with him that he couldn't fully explain. And betting he didn't say what he said. I mean, filling this part a little bit too much, but he was thinking to himself, I'm assuming, that the Europeans explored, and we had the means to get what we wanted, and we kept it for ourselves, a lot of things, and now you see that we have a lot of stuff still. Right? But everyone else some people did that, some people didn't. And that's kind of how it all turned out. But the deeper question, there's so many things about this question. It's just a very straightforward question that, this whole thing gets into. That kind of, because he was bugging him. It was like, well, you know what? Why do some peoples in the world seem to have unfair advantages over other people? Where does that come from? And there's a lot of things, a lot of explanations given. Some more scientific, some less scientific, whatever, and there's a lot of people. We think about this subject, I think, from time to time. We're prone to think about this from time to time. Again, for various reasons. This whole video is probably devoted to this subject because there's so many things I'm trying to explain here. I'll try to be as able to explain them as I possibly can. But I thought I might start out this video with some kind of analogy of world history, and I think you'll know what I'm saying. I think you'll know what I'm talking about with these different things that I'm going to say. So there was once a being which, there was once a being, to me, he is a man. I picture him as a man. But there was once a being that was perfect and all-knowing, who had a whole bunch of children. And a whole bunch of them. We'll say he had some kids that were white. He had some kids that were a little bit more olive-toned or yellow-skinned, we'll say, with eyes that had a little bit of an eye fold. It was a little bit different than some of the kids that were white that had a different kind of eye fold. He had some kids that were a bit more brown-toned, we'll say a little bit red, but more just brown-toned. And others that were a little bit darker than that, a little bit darker brown skin color. Both of these kids, the medium brown, the darker brown, had straight hair. He had some other kids that had very dark skin and tightly curled hair. And he had other kids that looked also different than all these other kids that I already described. So his kids looked very diverse. And they all had different kinds of qualities. But all those qualities somehow came from their father. In some way, shape, or fashion. And he put them in a world and had them spread out and do their own thing. He tried to give them guidance. But he didn't try to interfere with their desire to learn for themselves and figure things out for themselves somewhat, make their own decisions, learn from their mistakes, hopefully, just experience life and everything that life has to offer. He didn't want to interfere too much because he realized that if he did, his kids would never become the people that they might possibly become. If they, ideally, he wanted them to become like he was. And interfering with all their choices wouldn't bring that about. And so his kids are, again, like I mentioned, they were all a little different. They had their squabbles, they had their alliances, they had their whatever. Some of the white kids, they were pretty smart. They were pretty clever. They were pretty imaginative, and they were good at organizing things, and sometimes they were good at just figuring out things. And they were not too far away from some of the kids that were maybe a little bit more olive-ish toned. that at the beginning of this world, they were right there hearing a lot of things that were coming straight from their father, from extremely good men. And so they had a lot of leadership in their younger years. And they were able to spread that knowledge. And they were able to help the white kids in that regard. And the white kids, they didn't always see eye to eye with these olive-toned kids. There were some squabbles, but you still had times when they got along pretty well. Then you had other kids that were kind of a little bit darker skinned and had straight black hair. Other kids that had eye folds and maybe squarish rounder faces. Farther east than those guys. And from the start, when they were in this world, those darker brown kids with straight black hair kind of had roots, we'll say, or they had things very much in common with both the very dark-skinned kids that went south, as well as the white and olive-toned kids more to the north and to the west of them. And so they had kind of qualities of both of those kids. Maybe the white and olive-toned qualities were a bit more dominant at times, but they became some of the kids that were among the most peaceful and most, we'll say, thoughtful and reflective of all the kids. Very prone to thinking very deeply about a lot of things, and they're a little bit less likely to have squabbles with everyone all the time. And then the kids that were farther to the east had their own way of thinking about things that were, let's say, just like the white kids. They valued order and organization very strongly, and they became very powerful because of their organization and because of their ability to manage what they had. And they also thought a bit about if you have squabbles with other kids, how do you defend yourself? And how do you fight? Not just with weapons, but hand to hand especially. They thought about that a lot because they didn't want anyone to get the better of them that way. And they were also not as big as some of the other kids as well. And then you come to some other kids that lived off in the islands to the south of them that, many of them had straight hair, many of them had a little bit more curly hair. But they also had connections with some of the folks I just mentioned. They were out in the islands for a long time, for most of their life. They didn't really have too many big things happen to them. Eating pineapples and breadfruit and taro, and some of them actually related or more connected with another group that I'll mention here in a bit. But I'll let you in more of these guys, about these guys here in a little bit. And of course you had the darkest skinned kids, went south into a very hot and more inhospitable place, much more so than anywhere else I've mentioned already. Some of it was desert, some of it was jungle, lots of bugs. Wasn't really a whole lot of stuff that they could have. But they were, some of them to the west were bigger, stronger. Some of them to the east were very lean, able to run for a ways without getting that tired, that much tired. So that was nice, but they didn't have what some of the other kids had, and especially as time went on, they definitely didn't have what some of the other kids had. But they tried to still be happy about life as best they could. And there were other kids that were separated by a gigantic ocean that had kind of a medium tone to their skin, more or less, depending, but it was kind of medium light brown toned. But let's just say red, in a certain sense of the word. And they kind of had a few folks that they were more connected to, somewhat, but for the most part they were pretty isolated for a while. And they actually weren't there as long as some of the other kids were. There was kind of a place that everyone was at originally, and then this other place that these medium-toned kids went to a little later on, we'll say. However, originally, everything was connected anyway. There was no dividing ocean. So, but we'll get into that later, which, so these folks these kids out on their own, they had a pretty good life. Pretty good. They definitely were interested in a lot of things about the world around them. And those olive tone folks I was telling you about, well, they have some connections with them as well. In a way, olive and white tone, but we'll say olive. But this is all kind of, but they were on their own for a while. And because they were on their own for quite a while, it wasn't really something that they were ready for when the white kids came over and said, we need some more land. They weren't ready for that at all. And as these kids got older, as they developed their civilizations, there came to be a country where instead of just having one people with one way of life, or a bit more of a set culture, if you will, this country said, you know what? We're tired of having these things foisted upon us, from the leaders of the leader kids. We want to make a place where everybody's welcome, all kinds of people. And we're going to do our best to make this the best place in the world. And in many respects, it did become the best place in the world. In many respects, but maybe not all. Maybe not all. Who's to say, right? Well, I think you know kind of what I'm talking about here. And I like to say kids because we actually are kind of like basically all kids. We're all kids compared to the being that we aren't sure exists, but some part of us thinks about from time to time, what if he does exist? All right, we're all kids compared to him, for sure. And just like a good father, mother would expect from their kids, they expect us to try to get along with each other, even though they know that we're going to have some squabbles. We're going to have some fights. Sometimes those fights will result in bloody noses. Sometimes they will result in going to the hospital. Sometimes some things will go unpunished, and some things will be unfair. Some kids will get a whole box of candy. Other kids might get a gumdrop. The reason why, the dad will want to, in his way, give everyone stuff. It might be different stuff, just like a father gives his kids different presents. But sometimes some of his kids will have presents from other kids, or they'll give each other presents. Some will get more than others. And some might actually end up using some of the presents more than others. Some might steal. And there's all kinds of things that I'm not even mentioning that, well, folks, if you haven't seen this National Geographic documentary, you really should watch it. Let me get a little bit more factual now, more scientific. Well, not scientific, but let me get a little bit tad more academic here. After I think you guys have understood what I'm talking about a little bit more. It's true. The Earth is not evenly spread out regarding its resources, regarding the quality of the food in different places that just exist there naturally, the soil, climate, as far as how comfortable it is to live there, how it helps or doesn't help you. There's all kinds of inequalities that exist in the world that I'm not even talking about. I'm not even specifically addressing. But food is a big deal. What's the one thing that you need to make sure that you have when you go on a trip? Right, food and water, and money to buy more food and water. So food's a big thing. It's the first thing. It was the first thing that they explored in this video, and it is a big deal. I mean, just think. Just think. How much effort would it take to feed yourself if food was even somewhat abundant? To pick it from the trees. Of course, I know a lot of us probably wouldn't want to kill animals, but we still like the taste of meat. It's not like a vegan, but what I'm trying to say is a lot of us wouldn't. We want other people maybe to take care of that. Take care of that side of what we want. Maybe could handle fishing or eggs or something, but don't worry, folks. As you know, I'm not a vegan, but kudos to the vegans out there. But basically, food. Yeah, we need it. And the more we don't have to spend time or physical efforts to get what we need, and the more nutritious that what we're eating truly is, the more we'll be able to do other things with our time. Or we can make fancier things to eat. Or whatever. If you go on a trip, you can spend more time doing what it is you want to do. Of course, eating food is very enjoyable, but at least you don't have to spend your trip, your vacation, trying to find it. Or at least not very much. You can go have some money, pick up some tasty fruit, and maybe to be somewhat healthy, a salad and some fish or something. Or whatever it is you want, it's there somewhere. as I was watching this documentary, getting back to the documentary, they're talking about hunter-gatherers in New Guinea compared to folks in the Middle East that were growing wheat and barley, making permanent homes, domesticating livestock, getting all these nutrients in the system that a lot of folks didn't have as much of in other places like Papua New Guinea. Population growing, had more time to think about all kinds of things about their existence, right? So they were getting pretty powerful. And then, lo and behold, we find that, and this is all just in the first section of this, the first part of this 3-part series, folks. Lo and behold, all that technology that they were developing with their time they had increased, well, the advantage they had spread to Europe, to the west, Asia to the east. And there was the Nile River, of course, but Africa, at least the deep, we'll say the central, southern areas that were a little farther from the Nile River, perhaps, there were places that this technology didn't really quite get to. And you had, in addition to that Fertile Crescent we know about, you definitely had other places that were developing other more advanced civilizations on their own, like China with rice, and so on and so forth. Definitely a few other places like that. Well, as I mentioned, this is a 3-part thing, so I'm not going to get into the other things that kind of tie in with the subject somewhat. But just based on that first part I saw, getting back to that professor who's talking to the young man from Papua New Guinea, what he would say, as far as I would know, just a third of what basically he might say is, white people came from a place where we had more nutritious food, a wider variety of food perhaps, and we then had more time to figure out how to become a bit wealthier, how to have more cargo. We just had more time and energy to do that. And that's the answer, but only a third of the answer, because again, I have to still watch the other 2 parts of this documentary. And I thought to myself, there's so many other things that we talk about aside from just something like food, right? There's so many other factors that go into what make different places more prosperous or poor, that all have a lot to do with the way people are living regarding what they will or won't do in terms of their ethics and all kinds of other things as well. But and then we ask the question, there's a few questions that come to mind. One of them is, we can try to speculate regarding if this was just the way things are, and if we believe that this is the way God intended things to be, why did he make things unequal and unfair? Maybe that's why there's no God, or if there is a God, there has to be a reason behind it. And does that mean that he favors one people over another people? Or does it mean something more along the lines of, he wants to see how his kids are going to share? If a parent gives a kid something awesome, like a coat of many colors, and that kid wears that coat of many colors, and his brothers don't really like how he's showing off that coat of many colors, and they sell him to some people that head into Egypt and you know the story from here, I think, a lot of you guys. Do you think that father that gave that kid a coat of many colors, do you think that he loves his other sons less? I want you to think about that for a bit. Do you think that he loves them less? You know. But, you know, we can think that. We can think that if we want to. We can think that if we want to. And that's okay. And another question, I suppose, would be, why didn't that kid with the coat of many colors, why didn't he split it up into pieces to give to his brothers to make things more even? Maybe it wouldn't have been a coat at that point. Maybe his dad should have given everyone a coat of many colors. Maybe, who knows why he didn't. Maybe we're given things in life to see how we'll use them. Are we going to hoard them to ourselves? We're going to steal other people's stuff? Or are we going to share what we have? And if we share what we have, how does that work out? Does that mean that we're going to be weaker? Does that mean that we're going to have someone take advantage of us and keep wanting more and more of our stuff until we don't have anything left? Or does it mean something else? I mean, we're taught that we need to share when we're little. Why are we taught to share? And if we don't have anything, and if we don't have anything in our entire lives, and we finally own something, and we maybe acquire some other additional things, when we're able to share what we have, how would that feel? You know, there's a lot of things that, are not very clear about this life. And including what happens after we die. And I can definitely tell you that we definitely do not take anything with us other than our character and what we've learned, and our skills and things. That's it. All the stuff we have accumulated in life, we cannot take with us. Can't. It changes life a bit knowing that. It does. And so, stuff. Why is it great to have things? Well, some things are great to have because they help us be happier and just survive. But we're also, those of us who have